Hey guys, welcome back to Tidal Gardens. So on social media, I teased this aquarium just a little bit. This is going to be our new quarantine system, and it is super elaborate for what it is, but it's only because we had a lot of equipment previously. So this thing kind of became a Frankenstein monster of old and new stuff, and it kind of tended to trend towards nicer stuff. So where to begin? We were looking at one point for just some off-the-rack aquariums. I went to a local place and we found some really nice aquariums from Planet Aquariums. We got this one here that has a frame, and we found a rimless aquarium for Becca's tank. So this guy here originally was intended to be another species-specific show tank, of which now there would have been, what, 4 of them? But instead, we noticed that a lot of our quarantine systems, they're really kind of process limited by just how many corals we could fit in there. Because we quarantine these things for so long, and sometimes we lose track of just how long it's even been, and we go about the process of restarting it. Sometimes like these Micromusas and Blastos and all the LPS in here, they've probably been in quarantine now for well over 2 months. We're just gonna give them a couple final rinses and then get them into our actual farming systems. But like I said, it takes a long time to get through that quarantine process. So just to speed things up, we figured that having yet another larger quarantine would help out a lot. And larger is also good because we want to be doing a lot more with SPS. Just to quarantine the SPS, I wanted a lot more headroom to provide a lot more flow. But anyway, before we get into all that, let's just go step by step through what we've built here as far as this tank goes. I was struggling a little bit as to where to start with this tank. So let's start with my least favorite part, which is this overflow box system that came with the aquarium. So there's a bunch of stuff that I kind of didn't love about this. Let's start with the stuff I do like. I like the triple drain assembly that allows you to have a main drain that you can back off with a gate valve. This is a nice Spears gate. There is a secondary overflow that sets the water line in here. You put a standpipe in there, and this guy barely trickles down into the sump. This third line is the emergency. That's assuming that this guy got blocked, and then this guy here will full siphon. Ideally, these would be larger. These are currently 1-inch drains. And on pretty much all of my other systems, I went with 1.5 inches. This simply does not drain a whole heck of a lot. Case in point, we're powering this tank right now with a Vectra L2 pump. And that pump, the maximum setting it can go is like 3 or 4 before this overflow gets overpowered. So not exactly a ton of throughput. And it's a lot more risk as well for clogging, because a snail can clog a 1-inch drain. A lot less likely to clog 1.5 inches. See what I mean? The real annoying thing, though, about this particular overflow box design, it's designed to be one of those stealth or ghost overflow things where a tank manufacturer only needs to drill like 2 holes. And there's a bulkhead system that fits through that, and then you have an overflow box on the inside that the bulkhead interfaces with. Problem with that design is that it leaks like crazy. It leaks so much. It took so much finagling that eventually what we had to do was get one bulkhead to sit on the glass on the inside, and then the gasketed nut on the backside of this overflow box inside. That's just to seal up the connection between the inside tank and the inside of this box. Theoretically, we should not have needed it, but in practice, it was leaking like crazy, and we did. So from that, now that we got that leak tested, then we can put in the outside box. So that's another set of bulkheads. So the outside box, I guess I should call it the inside box, right? The inside box in the tank kind of like goosenecks in a little bit. So aesthetically, it's not my favorite thing. Leaks are far worse than an aesthetically displeasing overflow. If I would have done it differently, I would probably do a much more robust design as far as water and leak control. I understand why manufacturers do this. It's a simple add-on product. All you need to do is drill a couple holes and then buy this kit and you're done. But from like the user end, don't love it. Again, bigger is always better because it's also possible to do something in the tank where you, like for example, it's possible to open this cleaning weir and that rush of additional water will also overflow this outside box because it's so little. So anyway, easily my least favorite part of this whole thing is this overflow box design. Okay, moving on down, what do we have? We have the two lines from this overflow coming down into the sump. This sump is kind of funny, right? It's funny because I did a video where I went through and refurbished this guy. This sump is every bit of 20 years old. It had all kinds of like scuffs. There was like a cruddy protective paper on the bottom that needed to come off. I mean, it's not perfect, but it looks new enough, right? What's kind of funny about this sump is that originally it was designed to flow the other direction. The water was supposed to come into these chambers. There was an external skimmer designed, and it would go through all these different chambers, and then the return pumps would be plumbed into those two 1-inch bulkheads down there. Our return pump now is a Vectra L2, and in doing so, they require at least like a 1.5-inch intake, and I didn't want to restrict it down to a 1-inch intake on that side. It turns out that there were these main drain intakes originally planned. They are 1.5-inch. So we ended up using this whole sump in reverse orientation, where the return pump side is over here and the intake side is there. And the one thing I guess that worked out about the 1-inch drains is that we actually had these two 1-inch ports that we could just tie right into. Originally, I was just planning on taking those flexible hoses and just sticking them into this chamber. But the more I thought about it, it's like, you know, we have the plumbing right there, so I'm just going to tie it right in. Water comes in here, goes through the skimmer compartment, then goes through just a little bit of filter floss that's going to collect all the particulates. You really can't see it too easily from far away, but there underneath here are some holes drilled in through this partition, so the water flows through here, down through the filter, then goes across the bottom, then comes up through the biological filter media, and then into the heater section. And then finally, it makes its way through a couple of bubble traps. I guess we just tossed in another bit of biological there. But then it goes through a couple of bubble traps before it gets to the pump. So that's the main layout that we're looking at. Moving now to this other end, here is the intake for the return pump. We're having it go through a true union ball valve and into our Vectra. I'm a big fan of true unions because if we wanted to service this pump, just close this guy off, and that will isolate the pump from the whole drainage issue with this sump. Now, one thing that I could have done, what I still could do, is cut in a 1.25 inch true union ball valve right here, and that would essentially allow me to close this valve, and that's relatively little water to have to clean up when I open this pump up for servicing. Now, this all happening up top here, I mean, it could drain quite a bit of water. I haven't really checked it out yet. We obviously hadn't had to service a brand new pump. But if it turns out that this is a huge flood and we have to get a whole bunch of towels or something like that, at that point, I'll just cut in an 1.25 inch valve. So the intake on this guy is 1.5 inches, output 1.25 inches. This is a view you don't typically get to see often, but it's our wire management. The nice thing about aluminum T-slot channel is that you can affix all types of different mounting to it. And we've essentially put in some pieces that allowed us to zip tie all of our power management and whatnot right up into here. Also, you can see the backside of like our controllers for the Vectra pump, as well as an MP60 that's sitting in the tank. I like this because it gets things pretty much out of the way, nothing sits on the ground or anything like that, and we can kind of more elegantly run wiring. People often ask about this stand material, It is aluminum T-slot, and what's used a lot in this particular stand is the 1.5 inch by 3 inch profile. It's a very, very strong system. This stand came from AluFab. I'll put a link in the description box below, but if you mention Tidal Gardens, they actually give a discount, which is kind of very cool on their part. They've been making several of our more recent systems. We used 80/20 in the past, but AluFab, they are a local company in Ohio, and so I decided to go with them. Another question I get asked a lot is about these leveling casters. These are a Korean brand called Footmaster. I guess it's an American brand, but I think they're manufactured in Korea. Anyway, they are also solid blocks of aluminum, and I have literally zero concern about all this weight being put on leveling casters. These casters individually are rated at 2,200 pounds, to give you an idea. And on this stand, there's a total of 5 leveling casters. Coming up from the return pump, we're using a little bit more hard pipe than we normally would. Oftentimes I would just go with flexible because it's so convenient. But this is a 5-foot span. And the nice thing, again, about aluminum T-slot is that we're able to just mount in a Unistrut brace. So this pipe is secured, well, it's secured by the pump itself, right here and right here. So this guy is very, very rigid. And we were able to even zip tie just to kind of clean up some of the drain lines directly to this pipe without any real concerns about too much weight pulling down or anything like that. This stuff is going to hold forever. The other thing is that we're reducing the size now of the plumbing coming out of this. Recall that the pump plumbing calls for 1.25 inches, and it does up to this point, at which point we reduce it down to a 1-inch barb. Again, from 1.25 inches down to a 1-inch barb. And this flexible line is 1 inch. In theory, guys, if I was really concerned about the flow balance between this line and the line over there on the left, I should have put in another ball valve or a gate valve here so that I could close down this line, because this is the path of least resistance. It's the shortest length and it's direct, and this guy gets the flow at 90 degrees on the T. Does it matter? Not to me, because this pump can put out so much flow that it overpowers this overflow box. Even though this line gets more water pressure than this line, it's not that big of a deal. I guess I could put in something if I wanted to look a little bit janky, but once again, I'm really not relying on this assembly for flow. We have an MP60 in the tank that really provides the flow. This is just to move the water throughout the system. But if this is something that you're super concerned about, where you want both of these lines kicking out the exact same water flow, then yeah, you'll want to put in a valve here. If you want more precision control, go with a gate. If you want to just get close enough, you can use a ball. One last word that I'll mention about the plumbing. We actually did not have all the parts we needed when we first started this project. This is a 3/4 inch bulkhead. So our 1 inch then has to get reduced down into 3/4. And we didn't have the right bulkhead for this, and we didn't have this reducer. So this is a threaded to barb 3/4 to 1 inch. Such a specialty piece. We could have janked something together using 4 pieces or something like that, but this was the correct thing to do, and we ended up just having to wait the 3-4 days for all this stuff to get shipped to us. But I'm happy that we did wait, because this is a much more elegant way to handle this little transition. But it's so super frustrating, because our loose plumbing pile that we have, it's pretty much Home Depot. Like, we have everything here except the threaded 3/4 and except the reducer. It's always going to be something, right? It's going to be some really weird esoteric piece, and that will stop this entire thing from holding water. But here we are, we got it going. You may have noticed that we had put the pump on these vibration isolators. Is this necessary? Not really for their main function. The Vectras are pretty quiet as far as vibration goes, and they have their own little rubber feet. We needed it just to match up the height from the bulkhead in the sump to the intake of the pump. It turns out that this distance was just perfect. So there we go. It's the perfect spacer that provides some functionality. Moving on now to some of the plumbing connections that were kind of these vestigial remnants of this old sump. Originally, this was an intake for a protein skimmer pump. We were using, I believe, like an Iwaki 40, I believe. Over on this side, this was used as a drain coming in for the sump. We used as many of them as possible, like we used one for the intake for the return pump. We used a couple for the drain lines from the overflow. But there were, again, these unused pieces that we had to then plug up. This guy here was giving me all kinds of trouble. And I'm usually a slightly better plumber than this, but I had a threaded plug for the inside the sump, and it leaked. I threaded plugged the outside and re-Tefloned the inside one, still leaked. So I kind of said, screw it, I'm gonna do the thing you're not supposed to do, which is just glue this sucker right in. And that worked out really nicely. This at this point is a sacrificial bulkhead, but I don't care. I just want the leaking to stop. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. What we've done in both the farm systems as well as this quarantine is to mount the Ecotech controllers to the aluminum T-slot. And we did that with a little piece of type 1 PVC. That's this gray material. I love this stuff. We use it as an underlayment for the tank. We use it as like a kind of like a platform for the sump. We use it pretty much all over the place. It's crazy expensive, but it's so easy to cut. It's waterproof, it's solid. Love the stuff. Anyway, we make these little control panel holders, and that's kind of like where everything is. So this is our MP60 controller, this is our L2 controller, and we'll be likely adding one of these Versas. So I'm thinking probably maybe like right here, we can mount him, and he'll have access to a container there and easily feed into the sump. So I don't know, guys, what do you think? Continuing with our Ecotech product showcase, I guess, we have this MP60. I have to say I'm probably the least lucky person when it comes to MP pumps. I've only owned a few, and I've kind of had issues in some way, shape, or form with all of them. It wouldn't have been my first choice. However, we have this pump. I wasn't going to use it anywhere else. It still makes a little bit of a rattle, and it does like this weird exorcist thing where the inside piece rotates on itself while it's running. I'm pretty sure it's not supposed to do that, but I don't know, guys, here we are. And lastly, guys, we have our Radeon XR30 Gen 5s. These are the blue models. For whatever reason, one of our guys here insists on the bluest of the bluest of the blue lights. And we do typically keep our acros and a lot of our SPS under bluer light. And in order to get like the par that we want, we went with these bluer fixtures. For photography, this would definitely not be my first choice, but this is a quarantine tank, and it does simulate more or less what it's going to be getting in our farming systems. That's kind of the thought process behind the XR30 blues over this tank. We're using 3 of them to cover a 60-inch by 24-inch footprint, and yeah, coverage is nice. We've used Ecotech Radeons pretty much all over the place. I'm still undecided about some future systems because some of them will require more thought and care as far as photography goes. But again, for the purposes of quarantine, this is a really nice balance between spectrum and par that we're looking for. All right, guys, that pretty much does it for this big quarantine system. Thank you all very much for watching. And I hope you learned a thing or two, maybe some ideas about your next setup, or even some mistakes that we made for you guys to avoid. Anyways, that pretty much does it from here. Happy reefing.